I wanted to mention, it looks like Boeing is now going to be introducing the largest passenger aircraft in the world. They've announced plans for the 777X, so that's 777X, and it's going to seat, depending on configuration, about 400 people. And the thing I thought was pretty cool about this is it's actually going to have foldable wings for taxiing between the runway and the terminal. Hey everybody, welcome to the Abroaders Travel Podcast, your weekly meetup with thousands of entrepreneurs, hustlers, creators, nomads, ninjas, wanderers, and world changers, all seeking to build the skills and connections to live a life without borders. If you want to learn more about what we do or download our entire podcast archive, check out the website, abroaders.com. Happy Wednesday morning and welcome to another episode of the Abroaders Podcast. I'm Eric and I'm checking in with you guys from Budapest, Hungary. Been here for about a week and a half and pretty excited to talk today about British Airways Avios. This is the last week that there's an opportunity to transfer Amex membership reward points over to British Airways and still get the 1-to-1 ratio. After that, they're going to be devaluing the transfer ratio from 1-to-1 to 1,000 to 800. So we're going to lose a significant percentage on the ratio. And so I wanted to spend some time today going over how I made my decision to transfer 50,000 of my Amex points over to British Airways yesterday, and just sort of some general considerations that you want to make when you're thinking about whether you should transfer points speculatively or proactively before you actually have the redemption in mind. So we're going to cover some of that stuff as well. Also have some news and updates from the world, a little bit of shakeups with transfer partners for some other programs. So we're going to talk about that and some of the bank co-branded deals. And I think that's going to be sort of interesting because this is sort of what underlies the reason that this British Airways deal is being devalued with Amex. Sort of the strength of the tie with British Airways and American Express has weakened due to pressure from Chase. And, essentially Chase issues the British Airways card, which we're going to talk about as well because it's just gone back up to the 100,000 sign-up bonus. And so these sort of dynamics are kind of underlying what's happening with this transfer ratio, and it can make it easier for us to sort of predict. Obviously, there's no sure bet in the frequent flyer travel hacking world, but you can sort of see what might be coming based on the moves that some of the big players, the big banks, the big airlines, and the frequent flyer programs themselves are making. So we're going to get into all that. Today's show notes are going to be at abroaders.com/Avios. All right, guys. So as I mentioned at the top of the show, I'm recording today. It's Tuesday morning in Budapest, Hungary, September 22nd. And a couple of notes before we get into the core content for today's show. There's still time to get on the Udemy pre-registration list. We did get approved, so our course is going to be launched on Udemy probably in the next week or so. We're just making a couple improvements. We have started to let some beta testers in, so do get on that list and you'll get early access to the course as well as some help with recommendations. We're going to do a customized round of card recommendations to make sure you get off on the right foot and get the right type of miles. So if you are interested in that, you can sign up at abroaders.com/Udemy. Other thing I wanted to mention is that we are beginning to take applications again for a next round of apprentices. So if you're interested in learning more about how to use points for travel, about travel hacking, or about location independent entrepreneurship and would like to work with us, we are taking applications. You can fill out a form at abroaders.com/apprenticeship. And we're going to be interviewing for a couple of different positions. One of them is most definitely going to be helping with our content production and getting information into emails and other forms that we can send out to our customers and to people that are following the show, listening to the podcast. We've got some really, really good information that we've got sort of getting ready to get published on the website, and we need help with managing that. we're also looking for someone to sort of be an operations person and help us work inside our internal systems. We're in the process of building a web application to manage credit card tracking and also help us track flights and things like that for redemptions for people that are using our booking service. And we've also, last but not least, got a big space for people to help us with our marketing, social media outreach, communicating with customers, communicating with people that have questions. We really want to expand this capacity. And so we're looking for people that are interested in learning what we do and getting a whole bunch more information out there to the world about how to travel with points and how to do so really, really cost effectively. So if you're interested, you can register, sign up for the apprenticeship, and we will go through the applications and probably start interviews in the next 2 weeks or so. And the application period probably won't be open for more than a week. So if you are interested, you should definitely do it right away. All right, so a couple of quick news updates. United's website is now officially allowing you to hold awards when you don't have enough points. Some of you may have heard me or AJ mention the PayPal trick a while back, which was basically a workaround for getting a ticket on hold for around 24 hours. You would essentially decide to pay with PayPal instead of with a credit card. And after the United site redirected you to the PayPal site to make your payment, you could back out without actually paying, and you'd get a record locator and it would hold your award. Well, so the bad news is when United updated their website, this stopped working. But now they are allowing you to hold an award for up until midnight the next day if you don't have enough points. So it still doesn't work if you have enough points in your account, but if you don't have the points, you can hold an award. So that can be a really good tool to use, and another reason why you don't necessarily want to proactively transfer Chase points into United. It can be very helpful to have a little bit fewer than the number of points that you want for an award if you want to hold that availability, get the rest of your plans in order, and so forth. Another sort of just interesting trivia thing I wanted to mention, it looks like Boeing is now going to be introducing the largest passenger aircraft in the world. They've announced plans for the 777X, so that's 777X, and it's going to seat, depending on configuration, about 400 people. And the thing I thought was pretty cool about this is it's actually going to have foldable wings for taxiing between the runway and the terminal, because the sheer size of the wingspan is going to be too big for a majority of airports in the world. And so this plane's wings are going to actually fold in so that it can taxi. And if you want to fly on this plane, it's probably not going to be in production until 2017, but there have already been some big time orders out of the airlines in the Middle East. So Etihad, Emirates, and Qatar have combined for more than 230 orders, with Emirates clocking in with over 150. So the bulk of the orders, at least the pre-orders so far, which don't necessarily mean that the airline is going to take delivery, but a big part of that has been from the Middle East. So that'll be interesting to see how that develops. Last news item is that Citi has added Virgin America as a transfer partner. And typically this is one of those currencies that is a sort of devalued or deflated currency in the sense that it's actually worth more and the transfer ratios are lower. So currently American Express transfers 2 Amex equals 1 Virgin American point, and Citi is going to have that same transfer ratio. But through October 31st, they've got a 25% bonus. So you can actually transfer 1,000 Citi thank you points and get 625 Virgin American points. I believe those are Elevate points. So that's something to keep in mind. Just kind of a rough idea of what you can do. They've got some interesting partners, but they do have very high taxes and fees. So you can fly on Emirates. An example would be maybe a Dubai, New York round trip. That would come in at 95,000 points and roughly $1,400 in taxes and fees. So that's big time in terms of the cost and taxes, obviously more than you'd probably pay for an economy, but this is for business class. Emirates also would be roughly 60,000 points for a round trip between New York and Milan, Italy. So, and that one's a little bit more reasonable at $670 in taxes and fees. You can do one-way awards. We've also got Virgin Atlantic. That's a transfer partner as well. You could redeem for upper class for 35,000 points round trip, JFK to London. And there's also Virgin Australia Australia. So the whole Virgin family is basically in this partnership. You could do Los Angeles to Sydney for 80,000 points round trip in business class. And just to sort of as a perspective, what I meant when I said that this is a deflated currency, if you compare that to Delta Sky Miles, round trip between Los Angeles and Sydney using Delta miles would be 160,000. So it's double the number of miles if you have Delta miles than if you have Virgin American miles. So that's what you want to keep in mind. And Virgin America stopped adding fuel surcharges to Virgin Australia. So this could be a very attractive way to use those city thank you points if you've got travel plans to Australia and you aren't able to find something with Delta miles. This could be a very good opportunity there. I see that as kind of the biggest win, 80,000 points round trip. Not sure how strong availability is there, but definitely something to take a look at. And a couple of other just quick options that you might have with the Virgin American miles would be redemption on Singapore Airline. Short haul flights could be very attractive. There's some short routes, Singapore to Bangkok and stuff like that, where you'd pay very low taxes and fees. So you could, be looking at $45 or $50 in taxes and fees and 10 to 15,000 points. All right. So before we get into the specifics of whether you should transfer to British Airways, whether you should move your Amex points, I wanted to kind of review some of the information about how these big deals get done between banks and frequent flyer programs and airlines. Often these are billions of dollars in deals for pre-purchased miles. And so in the past year or so, we've had American Express re-sign their agreements with Delta and with Starwood Hotels. Citi re-signed with American Airlines and also elbowed Barclays out of that agreement, basically forced them to stop taking new card members for the Barclays Aviator card, which was previously the US Airways card. Chase re-signed with Southwest. And then in kind of a big shakeup, American Express lost their deal with JetBlue. The co-branded card is now issued by Barclays, and they also lost their deal with Costco to Citibank. Now, the Costco deal, not such a big deal for people that are using points for travel, but it was a pretty huge contract. And so this actually really surprised me as well. And, what sort of happened, some sort of the implication is that a lot of the banks got a little bit more defensive. And Amex ended up re-signing Delta for a $2 billion plus deal. And it seems like they paid quite a bit more than they paid the last time when they did their deal with Delta. So it looks like, the airlines or the frequent flyer programs at least are starting to get a little bit more leverage in these relationships as the banks are sort of competing. And there's not that many big deals to be done. There's the major airlines in the US, American, United, Delta. There's some sort of smaller co-branded deals. And so this is a big part of what drives these transfer program deals and the ratios, which is a big part of the show today, and then also the co-branded card. So I mentioned that Barclays got JetBlue. So American Express is no longer going to be issuing a co-branded JetBlue card. That was a contract that Barclays was able to get away from them. And Barclays also picked up Hawaiian Airlines. And so the big takeaway here is that when these sorts of things change, it also has an impact on transfers. And so take this, for example. Chase issues the British Airways card that currently has a bonus for 100,000 Avios, albeit if you spend a lot of money in the first year of card membership. And so because they have that co-branded deal, Chase and British Airways have that relationship, Chase was able to sort of muscle American Express out of their current transfer partnership with British Airways. Now, they're not ending the transfer partnership, which would be a very big loss, but they are devaluing the ratio. And so, Chase Ultimate Rewards also transfer to British Airways, and those transfer at a 1-to-1 ratio and presumably will continue to transfer at a 1-to-1 ratio. And so what they wanted to do is make sure that American Express membership rewards points wouldn't get the benefit of the same ratio that they had. And so Chase sort of pushed Amex out of that. And so that's something that you want to watch out for just in general as these deals develop. One of the big things that I certainly hope happens is that Citi is able to leverage their renewed co-branded relationship with American Airlines and eventually bring American into the Thank You Rewards program, because that would be a huge win. They don't have any U.S. airlines, and truly Thank You Rewards are pretty limited in capacity. You can use them. The best redemptions are probably to move them to Singapore or to move them to Air France. But neither of those is truly a top-notch transfer partner. Obviously, Amex has Delta, Citi has nobody, and Chase has United. And so those are sort of the big transfer partner deals, but Citi does have the co-branded card with American. And so that makes it pretty easy to earn those American miles. I'd really love to see Thank You points be able to transfer as well. So today I basically broke down the discussion into 6 considerations that I took into account before making a transfer of Amex points over. And by the way, guys, the deadline is October 1st. So you want to move those points by the end of September. And the deadline is around when you initiate the transfer. And very importantly, if you haven't linked your American Express account to your British Airways account, you need to do that immediately, because even if you're not going to transfer points, because it takes a few days for your account to get linked up. They have to basically contact British Airways and get the transfer set up so that they can instantly transfer points into your account. And so you want to have that happen as soon as possible to make sure that you're able to actually move your points before the deadline happens. Okay, so before we talk through these sort of 6 considerations that you want to make before proactively transferring points, I wanted to just run through sort of the numbers that we were looking at from our redemptions and redemptions from our booking service. So first of all, British Airways points have come in at between 1.5 and 1.65 cents per point. And so just to review how the cents per point is calculated, what we're doing here is we're taking the cheapest economy ticket that you could buy for the same sort of acceptable route, acceptable range of days. So in other words, a viable substitute for a paid ticket. And then we take and subtract out what you would pay with the miles in terms of taxes and fees. So let's say that the paid flight, you're going to book a one-way from the US to Europe, and the paid flight is $1,100. And your taxes and fees when you redeem British Airways is $100. So what we do with cents per point is we take the savings, or in this case, $1,000 in savings, and we divide by the number of points it costs to get the ticket. And that gives us the cents per point. And so we've tracked this over hundreds of redemptions. And so British Airways comes out roughly to 1.5, 1.65 cents per point. That's the savings per point used. Amex in general, the transferable currency, if you take into account all the redemptions from transfers out to other programs, comes out to 2.77 cents per point. So not quite double, but almost double the value of the British Airways points. So it doesn't look all that great for British Airways, just sort of on the surface. And as far as a breakdown of the different main transfer partners, Aeroplan comes in first with 4.06 cents per point, then Delta with 4.03, ANA with 2.57, Air France with 2.47, and JetBlue in last place behind British Airways with 1.45. JetBlue is a value-based program, so it's actually tied to the price of the ticket, so that number is not going to move very much. But a couple of key things to keep in mind here. It's not just the raw numbers, because these are skewed by business class redemptions. So people that are looking to use their miles to fly coach and just get there, travel more rather than travel in luxury. If you don't care quite so much about having a seat, you can handle being in coach for 8 or 10 hours or 12 hours to get to your destination. And you realize that might make it possible to take an extra flight each year with those points. Those folks are actually going to possibly get a lot more value out of British Airways. And the other thing is that you're probably going to get a lot more value if you have a very high value for stopovers. If you want to do a sort of a route that's going to give you a chance to get to see a bunch of different cities, if you want to stop in a few places in Europe, those are going to be reasons that British Airways points are going to be much more valuable for you. And so those are things you want to keep in take into account when you're considering this. So There's a couple of reasons that you want to keep your transferable points in the transferable program and not make this sort of redemption. It's never a good thing to sort of handcuff yourself and say, I'm going to commit 50,000 points or 100,000 points to British Airways, because as soon as you do that, you never can move them back to Amex. So this is, if you decide to make this transfer before the ratio changes, it's a one-way street. It's a decision that you make, and you know you're going to use those British Airways points. You're never going to be able to take them back into Amex and transfer them out to Aeroplan or ANA or Delta. So that's one of the things that you have to concede when you do that. And the big problem there is that different programs have access to different seats and on different flights. And so, for example, Delta can book on SkyTeam partners. And so they have access to totally different availability than Aeroplan and ANA. So, with Amex, a specific example here is going to be you can move Amex to Air France or Delta, and both of them are going to have roughly the same availability on different partners with the SkyTeam alliance. But Aeroplan and ANA are going to have relatively the same availability as each other and totally different availability from Delta and Air France. And so Aeroplan ANA, they have access to those seats on Star Alliance. And so it's really important that like the idea is you want to find the seats that you're going to book first and then make the transfer. So if you're moving points speculatively, you're restricting the availability, you're restricting the options that you have. And then the second thing that happens is, you're also risking devaluation, because as soon as you move those points, you become subject to that program's rules, which means so if you move points to British Airways, you're subject to their expiration policy, you're subject to their routing rules, their booking rules, all of the things that come with the British Airways program become the rules that govern your new Avios points as soon as you make that non-reversible transfer. And so that's one of the other big considerations that you want to take into account. And we're going to kind of run through sort of what some of those rules are and how those different trade-offs are going to play out. So first of all, let's talk about access to the right airlines. This is in terms of availability and the flights that you're going to want to book. British Airways is partners with all the airlines in One World, and then in addition, Aer Lingus, which is based in Ireland, and Alaska Airlines, which is sort of an independent. They're partners with a whole bunch of different programs, so you can use British Airways points to book on Alaska flights as well. So one of the big things is if you happen to be in a One World hub, or you have plans on a lot of routes that are going to be operated by One World Airlines, British Airways could actually make a lot of sense. And so, for example, one of the reasons that AJ and I decided to transfer a lot of our Amex points over to the British Airways program is that we fly a lot on short-haul routes in Brazil, which are operated by TAM, which is a member of One World. We also have some plans to be in Asia, and so there's opportunities to fly in and out of Hong Kong, possibly Tokyo. Hong Kong's major airline is a major hub for Cathay Pacific, which is a One World airline. Tokyo is for Japan Airlines. Also in Europe, there's a couple of great options with Iberia and Air Berlin. Also, obviously, British Airways, but they do have somewhat higher taxes and fees. And we're going to talk about that in just a second. But sort of the main thing to consider here is you want short flights with British Airways, and you want them to be on direct routes. Because every time you stop, every time the plane lands, the number of miles becomes greater. And this is actually a good thing for people that value stopovers, because with stopovers, you're essentially paying for them anyways with British Airways. Every time you land, they're charging you an additional price in miles. And so unlike some airlines where you could fly around Europe and you might have to make 3 connections to get to your location, they still charge you that one price, that flat rate, because it's a one-zone flight. With British Airways, every time you land, they charge you again. But on the plus side, you can stay as long as you want and not pay extra. So that's sort of a big place where you can sort of see that trade-off take effect. And, that's what you want to look at is number one, do you have access to a hub that has direct flights? And then the last piece of this is economy versus business class. Folks that want to redeem for business are going to do way better with Delta and with Aeroplan and with ANA. And so that just flat out, if you want to fly mostly business and you don't really want to fly short routes, you want to focus on using your points to fly long haul, you don't want to move points from Amex to British Airways. It's just not going to be as good of a value for you. The other thing that you want to keep in mind is the fuel surcharges. So British Airways does have very high fuel surcharges for flights across the Atlantic. There are some ways to get around those, and that's by using partners like Air Berlin and using Iberia. That was how I got from Colombia, from Medellin over to Spain. The flights that I was considering, obviously not really considering, but the other options, the alternative to fly through London would have cost me about $800 in taxes and fees, whereas my Iberia flight from Medellin to Madrid was about $60 in taxes and fees. So you want to take a look at those routes. Asia tends to be good. Cathay Pacific has very reasonable taxes and fees. Japan Airlines has reasonable taxes and fees. So if you're going to fly on those routes, you're okay with British Airways. But again, long haul is not a good value there. You're probably going to be a lot better off using ANA and flying long haul, although you do have to fly round trip with ANA. Aeroplan lets you fly one way on routes to the US, so that could be a way that you can use that. You're going to pay, slightly higher taxes and fees than you would with Delta, but you're going to do much better than flying a long haul route. You're going to pay a lot more miles with British Airways. I want to provide some tools, some resources so that you can see whether your upcoming travel plans are going to go well with British Airways. And so the first one, sort of the most basic tool out there, is Great Circle Mapper. It's gcmap.com, and it's essentially just a free way for you to look up the mileage between each airport on your itinerary, and you can cross-reference that with the British Airways route map and the British Airways award chart and see sort of what the prices are going to be. The next resource essentially leverages Great Circle Mapper. Wandering Aramean, who is Seth Miller, and I had him on the show a little while back. Really great interview. I definitely encourage you guys to check out that episode. But he put together two different tools for British Airways research. One of them is an intelligent route search, which I find extremely useful. You put in your origin airport and your destination, and it uses its knowledge of what partners British Airways has and what the direct routes, what flights actually operate, and it'll tell you what the price should be on the British Airways depending on where you stop. And so this is super powerful. Like, for example, I'm going to be flying with Gabriela from Budapest here in Hungary over to Bangkok for the DC conference. And if you put that route, Budapest BUD to BKK, it's going to give you, I think, 4 or 5 options with British Airways. And one of the options is Budapest to London, London to Bangkok. That one's quite a bit more expensive than taking the option of Budapest to Doha, Doha to Bangkok. And so obviously the first one through London is operated on a British Airways flight. So in addition to paying more miles, you would also pay a much higher taxes and fees rate on top of that redemption. With Qatar Airways, I believe my redemption price was going to be about $150 in taxes and fees per person and $32,500. So that's sort of the lowest price that you can get from Budapest to Bangkok, and the connection's in Doha. The other nice thing about that route is that it's sort of evenly split. It's about 12 and a half, 13 hours from Budapest to Asia, to Bangkok. And so being able to stop in Doha gives you 2 sort of bite-sized 6-hour flights, which is a lot more manageable in economy than doing, a 1-hour flight and then an 11-hour flight or something like that. Or in the case of London, even worse, you're going in the wrong direction to start. So anyways, check out this Wandering Aramean search tool. And then also there's, in addition, a route map that gives you a visual sort of coded by price based on the British Airways distance chart. So you can sort of see everything in green is going to be the stuff that's going to be 4,500 Avios. Everything that's in yellow is going to be the ones that are at the 7,500. Everything in the next color is going to be the 10,000. And so you can sort of see visually what airports are in range of the shortest, cheapest pricing. Those are some big time tools that I think will help. The other resource you want to look at is the Abroaders program page, which is also going to be linked in the show notes here at abroaders.com/Avios. And that lists all the British Airways partners. It lists the rules. So, what the booking rules are, what the pricing is, what the change fee rules are, all that stuff, and also information to call up British Airways if you're not able to price out the award on their website, as well as the link directly to the website where you can book awards. So that's a great place to sort of start your research. And then the next thing, British Airways, as far as the rules go, as I already said, there's free stopovers because they basically force you to pay for every stop anyways. So if you're going to make a multi-stop trip, this is a good deal. You can also do one-way flights, obviously, and British Airways doesn't have a close-in booking fee. So if you're under 21 days from departure, then British Airways can be more attractive than some of the other partner programs that have access to the same flights. So one example here is American Airlines. I actually booked my flight from Budapest to Bangkok on American Airlines using Advantage miles instead of British Airways. And the difference was that instead of $150 in taxes and fees, it was going to be about $50 using the American miles. And it was almost the same number of miles. It was just a little bit more expensive in points with American. But had I done that under 21 days, British Airways would have been potentially a better deal because I would have ended up paying a $75 close-in booking fee. So anyway, something to keep in mind. The last thing that I think, sort of the sixth consideration here, as far as whether you should transfer, is what other means do you have of getting the same points? So for AJ and I, we have 85,000 85,000 Amex points available, and we decided to transfer 50,000 points, which is a big chunk of what we had available with the Amex membership rewards program. And the reason that we decided to do that is that we have an extra 100,000 Amex points coming in from the Amex Platinum card, which we sent out an email to everybody on the list as soon as that offer was available. And we had about 30 people end up getting signed up and approved. So one of the things you want to look at is inbound points. If you've got a bunch more Amex points coming in, you can be a little bit more liberal with your decision to move points to British Airways before the devaluation. At the same time, if you have a way to get a lot more British Airways points without using your Amex points, that's also something you want to keep in mind. And so that brings us to the British Airways offer. The co-branded card from Chase is currently offering 50,000 miles after spending $2,000 in 90 days. And then the offer is tiered. So you're definitely going to get 50,000 miles as long as you can spend 2,000 in 90 days. But you have a full year to continue to spend on that card. And if you spend 10,000, you're going to get 75,000 points. And if you spend 20,000 in the first year, you're going to get 100,000 points. So the 100K offer is back. It's not as easy to get as it was originally. When I got the 100K offer about 2.5 years ago, it was spend $3,000 and get 100,000 points. That was obviously a much better deal. But if you do have a lot of spend, this can be a way to get a bunch of Avios points without burning a bunch of Amex points if you didn't get that Amex Platinum personal offer. Even better if you got both. Definitely something to go for. The two things to be aware of with this offer. Number one, the $95 annual fee is not waived. So if you're going to get the 50,000 points, you can consider those are probably worth about $750 based on our 1.5 cents saved per point that I mentioned at the top of the show. So you want to, you're going to have to subtract out that $95 fee. So the bonus is maybe worth $650 in savings. And then the other thing is that the sign-up bonus is available to those who don't currently have the card and have not received the new card member bonus in the last 24 months. So number one, if you have the card right now, you have to close it first before you apply. It doesn't seem to be that there's a day, like a time frame or a waiting period. So you could conceivably close the card today and apply for a new account tomorrow or the next day. Probably wise to give it a couple of days in between. The second part is you can't have received the last bonus for the card in 24 months. So this is churnable, but there's a 2-year waiting period. I got the card about 2.5 years ago, so I would be eligible. But considering the new Amex Platinum sign up and the City Premier card, I probably won't be going for this one this time around. But it is a good move if you've got available applications, you haven't applied for anything recently. This could be a really nice card if you've got some of the travel plans that we talked about that are going to make these British Airways points stretch further for you. Okay, so that's pretty much it as far as the considerations. Just to sort of recap, you want to take into account what access to airlines the program has. So generally speaking, if you're looking at transferring proactively, pay attention to which alliance the program that you're transferring to is a part of. So with British Airways, it's going to be One World and plus the Aer Lingus and Alaska Airlines. If you were to move to ANA or to Aeroplan, they're going to have access to Star Alliance, which is a whole different set of airlines. And then if you move to Delta, they're going to have access to SkyTeam. Same thing with Air France. So pay attention to which partner airlines the transfer program has. Second thing is, what are the availability trends? So which routes are you planning on flying, and are there award seats available? That's one of the biggest mistakes that people that are new to this make, is they think that just because you can buy a ticket on Kayak or on the airline's website means you can use miles. And there are tons of blackout dates. So when the airline thinks that they might sell all the seats, especially in business and first class, there's nothing you can do to get those seats with points. You just have to wait until the airline decides to open them up. So check the availability, see if the dates you're planning on traveling are available. And if your travel dates are within the next year, you should book right away. The idea is, if you transfer the points, transfer them to the program that's most advantageous for you to make the booking, and confirm before anything can change, before they can change the rules, they can change the pricing, the taxes and fees could be assessed differently. All of those things are unknowns. And so that's what you want to be aware of before you commit to those irreversible transfers. The third thing to keep in mind is what those taxes and fees are going to be, the surcharges. Delta is going to be the lowest for sure with Amex. So if you're very cash poor, you want to pay minimum out of pocket, Delta, although you're going to pay more points, is going to be the cheapest out of pocket. Then ANA, Air France, Aeroplan, and British Airways, depending on the routes, depending on the partners used, they're going to have definitely higher fees than Delta, but just kind of depends on the route. So price those out, take a look at the program that you're going to be using. Fourth is, what are the mileage rates for the routes that you plan to fly? So again, tools for British Airways are going to be the Wandering Aramean route map and route search, as well as Great Circle Mapper. And you can also see the British Airways award chart on the Abroaders program page. So we're going to link to all four of those. And you want to just price out what it's going to cost you to fly. And then also check out the program pages for the other transfer partners. Look at Delta, look at ANA, and see how that compares with what you'd pay if you transfer to Avios. Fifth is, what are the booking and routing rules? Obviously, stopovers, you're at an advantage if you want stopovers. You're paying too much if you don't want any stopovers, unless you can find a direct flight. So that's the key with British Airways. And then sixth is, what other means do you have of getting the same points? If you're eligible for that British Airways offer, you're probably a lot better off getting the new card from Chase, spending $2,000 and getting 50,000 points, than moving 50,000 Amex points like AJ and I just did. Those are your considerations. Hopefully that is helpful for you guys. Next week, I'm going to be probably checking in from Belgium. I was able to get a Wizz Air $30 round trip from Budapest over to Belgium. Actually, not to Brussels, though, to a place that's about an hour from Brussels, so probably why it was so cheap. And I am going to be flying on the pink Pepto-Bismol colored plane, but you can't really beat $30 round trip. There's cab rides in New York that are more expensive than that, so I'm definitely happy, and it will be a new country for me. This week's International Jam comes thanks to Barack Obama's summer playlist. I've been jamming to that on Spotify. This one is by a Spanish-born artist from Sevilla, Spain. Her name is Mala Rodriguez, and the track is Tengo un Trato. Hope you guys enjoy. This one's at the top of the playlist for folks in Madrid, Barcelona, Mexico City, and Buenos Aires. So hopefully it gets you in a Latin mood. I will see you all next week, 8 a.m. Eastern Standard. Wherever you are, travel safe, and thanks for being with us. Hey brothers, don't be shy. Hop over to the website and join our email list for exclusive travel hacking content. If you like what we're up to, the best way you can support the show is by leaving us a 5-star review on iTunes. Lastly, we would love to hear from you, so send your show feedback to Eric or AJ at abroaders.com. We will see you next week.